Okay, everyone. So today we have Shari Hughson. So a quick bio on Shari before we get into this is Shari was previously a nurse. After that, she started her own successful senior care or nursing home company,
Home health care company.
home healthcare company that she sold and was quite successful. After that, she tried to start two other businesses. Both of them failed, and this is quite interesting. But you ended up going bankrupt as well. After that, you rebounded, sold another very large company, and then you went into the wilderness for 7 years.
7 years.
7 years building an Earthship and also studying about how to live in the wilderness with a couple of indigenous groups and one tribe in Africa, right?
Yes,
Okay,
absolutely.
amazing. So we have a lot to get into today. So Sherry, so what's the story? So how did all this stuff happen? I don't even know where to start, but maybe you can take it.
Yeah, yeah. Thanks so much for having me. And I've certainly led this sort of life of trying new things and doing things that I have dreamt of doing and want to do. So, yeah, I started out as a nurse, realized totally wrong career, completely wrong job. And my dad had always said two things he regretted in life. One was that he had children, but the second one was that he didn't move out west and start a business. And so I moved out west and started a business at the age of 25. So I knew nursing career wasn't for me, but at the same time, I knew it was valuable to turn into a great healthcare company. And so my original intention was just to be a nurse and do home care. Me doing home care, independent, not having to report to a boss, and not being a nurse at a hospital. And it boomed. I had 75 employees in the first year, and we just grew exponentially year on year on year. And it became a national company. And I knew nothing about business and ended up having a nice, successful exit in my early 30s. I went and took an MBA thinking I had no clue about business, even though I'd just grown a national company and exited. I took an MBA, and through that, or right after that, I also, traveled the world. I spent a ton of money. I day traded for a while. Got it dabbled in real estate. I blew a ton of money traveling and enjoying things I love, tons of education, and an MBA. After that, I had business fail and lost a whole lot more money. And then I started the third business and it failed spectacularly. And I was back to bankrupt, back to being like a student with nothing. And so the restart from that was obviously a really difficult time. But of course, I had to get a job. So I got a job with a healthcare company. And a year later, we purchased that company, myself and seven partners, and a venture capital firm. And we bought that company back from a US parent. And we grew it. It was a medium-sized business, and we grew it to the largest private health service company in Canada. I was able to purchase my first home healthcare company back in this company, so I got to sell it twice, and so I ended up having a great exit from that business. The exit from that business, though, was on my needing to go and live this dream, and this dream was the my husband and I, both as children, not knowing each other then, had this dream of living off the land. And off the land's very different from off grid. Yes, we were off grid, but off the land was we wanted to live like our ancestors did. We wanted to feel what that felt like. We also wanted to stop buying anything from society to see what that felt like. So we sold everything, including the business, obviously, and moved to the middle of nowhere in British Columbia and lived 2 full years as hunter gatherers, didn't buy a single thing. And over the full 7 year journey, we built an Earthship home. That's one word. And experienced a whole different culture and life that we could never have imagined.
Okay, wow. There's a lot to get into there. So, okay, um, so you have this first big success, and so at that time, I would imagine you have a lot of folks around you that are recognizing you socially. It's an interesting experience. I want to get into the later part of this too, but I think the early part of the story is a good, interesting place to start. So you're getting recognized. You're able to be free and try a bunch of different things, and then you fail twice and hit rock bottom. So can you talk about that part of your life and that what that was like emotionally, also socially, why you think, um, one thing I'm curious about too is uh, sometimes businesses fail, but for you personally, even, your financial situation was kind of really severely damaged. So what was that whole journey like? Like what happened from the ascent and then back down?
Yeah, and I'm there's a lot in that journey, but I think the number one thing is sort of around money. So the reason I started that first business was I came from a place of not um, we weren't poor, but we certainly weren't in middle class either. So I came from a family that no one had ever gone to university. Um, that money was always an issue. And so my driving force for starting that business was fear of not having money and fear of being dependent on somebody else for money. And so fear can be a great motivator. It can also freeze other people, just stop and don't do anything. For me, it was this I must find a way to have a different financial situation than my family did. I started waitering when I was 15 to put myself through university to get that nursing degree, realizing in the first year that I was like in the wrong career. I couldn't reverse that. So this journey up to success, I didn't understand money. I had no learning about money. I had a family that grew up talking and fighting about scarcity of money. And so I had no framework for money. And so looking back, I sort of think not sort of think, I didn't feel like I deserved the money. I didn't understand how to manage it. I felt like an imposter. I had made all these big name friends that are millionaires and billionaires, and I'm in this circle of people that I never imagined I would ever be around. I'm in five-star everything. Um, and my brain and mindset couldn't shift yet to this place of abundance. And so I think in many ways I sabotaged as well. So the businesses failed, but they failed almost because my own psyche, my own ego, my own personal insecurities couldn't quite allow me to be where I was. And then the bankruptcy, the embarrassment and shame. Now I'm like all these people that I'd met and, I'd won all these awards and now I'm like, ah, it's like, oh, this is not good. You certainly learn who your friends are. Just like when you go through a divorce, you learn who your friends are. You do when you go through bankruptcy. So anyway, it was a journey of learning about money, I would say, and getting comfortable with money.
When did you start to realize that it was some of these personal issues that were kind of self-sabotaging you? Because was it after you hit rock bottom, or what at what point did you kind of start to realize like this is maybe not, of course there's external factors, but a lot of this is being driven internally as well?
Um, I think I knew even when I started that first business, even as it started to grow, I knew that there wasn't that I was a bit skewed in my thinking about who I was. I was a bit skewed in my thinking about finances. I recognize that I probably, some of the insecurities I had weren't quite right. But at the same time, you're on a ride and you keep going with the ride. It's doing great. So the real true realization came when the bankruptcy happened, right? Of you really have to self reflect and really look at yourself, not just the business, and really figure out what is important here. So, what really is important was that I was still okay, still healthy, still going for runs, still me. Nothing at actually had changed. And my worst fear, which was, fear, money motivated me to get going, and now I've lost it all, was this realization that it's not that bad. Really. All those emotions and embarrassment and stuff, like really. What did all that mean, and am I going to survive it? Yep. And so that was when I really clued in that I played a big part in how I was viewing myself and how I was viewing money, and how to take a gentler approach to success. Would be a good way to say it.
What do you mean by that? Gentler approach to success?
I was on the hamster wheel. I was so driven to get out of poverty and so driven to never need anybody to support me. So driven to have more, more, more through all of that. And that was the driving force. And once you have nothing, you go, oh, okay, all right, not that bad. And really, why was I trying for so much more? Why was I on this 16, 17, 18-hour work life? For what? What did I actually like in life? What were my things I enjoyed? I loved the wilderness. I loved hiking. I was an adventure racer. I loved being outside and activities and fitness. And so that's where I was happiest. Why was I constantly 16, 18-hour days trying to get somewhere that did I really need that much? Not really, no. No, not to go do what I would love to do, which was wilderness.
It's pretty. Um, I think there's a little bit of a movement now to expose this relationship between just your personal life and how it affects everything around you, because I think it used, or I think it was more common before to think that you can separate these things out, but I think people are starting to come around to the fact that a person's a person. You can't necessarily do some of these things. And what's interesting about your story too is that you actually, even with those things, you actually hit the first like milestone. You actually sold it. You had a great exit. You did it. And so at that point, a lot of people might think, okay, well, you solved the problem because you were worried about poverty. Now you're rich, so it's all good. But in reality, it's like, I guess, even externally, if some of these things get taken care of, you kind of are left with a bit of like a psychological deficit still around that, and then it just like doesn't end until I guess you deal with it on the root level.
You
Um,
got it.
and it seems like you clued into that after the second and the third companies.
Yeah.
So when you hit rock bottom, did a lot of this stuff just like a lot of these realizations just come as you were sitting through it and trying to reflect on it, or did you go see a therapist, or how did this stuff start to make sense to you?
Yeah. And I did, I think I was probably having some realizations all along. And so the final death of the third business was sort of like, okay, all right. It's not the success of the business isn't just because of me, and because your ego gets wrapped in all of this. So the ego blow really makes you clue in that there's so many other multiple factors to what made it successful. But I did in my 20s during the first company. It was wildly successful and growing, but I actually sought two people at that time. I did seek a mental health counselor to help deal with some of the issues of childhood, and a life coach, an executive coach, to try and learn how to be a better what I thought was leader, but in many ways it was a better human being. And and so many of those things that I learned at that time, I started to experiment with in my 30s. And even though I failed, I was learning. And I learned so much in that journey of trying to figure out me. And both those businesses were still about figuring out me. It's all connected back to me. Um, by the time the bankruptcy happened, yes, it had some final pieces to the puzzle, but I was already in that transformation mode.
Yeah. And what happened to you socially during that period? So you mentioned like it's a good way to see who your friends are and who stays and things like that. But so you hit uh after you hit the bottom and you're on your way to recovery, what's the process like to get yourself out of that? Because obviously you still ended up getting back on your feet and going on to build something. Uh, correct me if I'm wrong, but even like significantly more successful
Yes.
than the first one.
Yep.
That's pretty interesting because one, some people might have a reaction where like you get hit with that those first few blows and it's really difficult, but you got up and then went on to go do another one that was even more successful. So obviously something pretty profound happened between that period as well, where on your fourth one now it's suddenly even better. So what happened?
Yeah. So at the lowest point, um, the hardest thing that I found was sort of facing what it was going to take to do it again. And sitting there I know how hard it was from the time I was 15, doing a job, going to school to get myself through university, doing two jobs to get the business started, a side hustle job to keep my business going in the first 3 years. Um, I knew what that had taken and the energy to get a business successful, to have been able to even launch a business, right? That whole process to get there was a lot of hours and a ton of energy and a lot of sleep and hard work. And so that was actually the hardest thing to get over, was this, oh God, I got to go do that again. Like, it was just like, oh my God, I don't know if I can do that much work again. And that realization and the letting go of the ego in me doing it all allowed me to say, who else in the company I'm in right now are entrepreneurial personalities? And as soon as that opportunity presented itself, now I was looking for other opportunities, but the opportunity presented within the company for us to buy it. And I immediately contacted all those people, and they actually were all reaching out as well, as they're entrepreneurial people within a company, and allowing others in, allowing myself to say, you know what, I'm not very good at this, but I'm great at this, which I couldn't admit before. And all of us being able to say, none of us have to be the CEO. Everybody fights and co-founder things of, I want to be the CEO. Um, it should be the person that is most strategic and that thinker person. And so the realization that I didn't have to be all these roles, the realization that I could have helped other people help in all this, and then coming together to say, let's just be who we are, do what we
Yeah.
each love to do, and build something different. And that corporate culture was what allowed us to become the biggest, largest private health service company in Canada. And and so it was this journey back to a healthy way of being an entrepreneur.
And how many employees did that company end up having? Just out of curiosity.
12,000.
Oh wow, okay. Um Huge. Okay. So did you after the bankruptcy though, did you did you question if you wanted to do um like it sounds like you went on this personal journey and you still came to the conclusion that you enjoy being a business person and doing that. I could have also seen a parallel universe where you realize you may still come to the point where you accept and you realize those things about yourself about coming from a scarcity mindset and you come to peace with it, but you take a different path, and instead you decide you want to become a painter, or I don't know, whatever else it would be.
Yep.
And it seems like you ended up doing some of this stuff anyway later in life too. But what brought you back to business specifically?
I love, and I knew that I loved, the thrill of going from something small and making it into something great. Something good to great, something small to bigger. I love the thrill of that, of figuring that out. To me, that is the most exciting thing. Even if it's a project, like a social innovation project, I love going from this sense of an idea to, oh my God, it worked. That gives me the greatest thrill. And that's what I loved. And it, in many ways, doesn't matter what the business is. That was what I loved. That was what I was enjoying. Not necessarily, even though I love the business as well, but it wasn't necessarily the kind of business or type of business. And this is something people get sometimes wrong. They're looking for, everybody says, find your passion and make that into your business. Your passion can also be something you just love doing, that you've got a strength in, that you really enjoy, and do that. It's a function versus a field.
This is an ongoing topic of exploration on the podcast, which is um, I feel like people in my generation are more than others pretty in one sense really thinking about some of the bigger questions a little bit earlier on, like where do they want to put their time into, what matters, that kind of
Yep.
thing, whether it's climate change or like a civil rights issue or something like that. But at the same time, it's pretty challenging to actually navigate through that and figure out what that is. And I came to a similar conclusion recently as well, that it's not just the specific problem or the area, but sometimes you can enjoy the process of something, agnostic of maybe the specific outcome or things like that. And that's a bit of a different way of thinking about it. And it's also a little more subtle, I've found.
Yes.
So that's really interesting. So you sell the fourth company now. You're in uh, a great spot. How did you feel about how did you feel about that after the exit compared to the time that you exited the first one?
Yeah. So the fourth exit was um, that I wanted to go follow a different dream. So I think the reason I had to do the fourth was I needed to just wrap it in a bow and say, yeah, I can do this. I had one succeed and two fail. I kind of have one more to just say, it's okay. I can do this. I'm good. It's all good. Um, and do it in a different way. So tick, box done. Um, and I have tons of things that I'd love to do. And my husband and I had this dream to live off the land. And so it was, how much do you need to go do that? What am I waiting for to go do that? How long do we wait? What's going to change in 3 years from now? If we just keep doing business and working and working and working, are we ever going to go do this? And so it sort of was this realization of, you got to go do. I had just finished and done a great dream that I had to be an entrepreneur. What other dreams do I have, and why not go do those? And so when I sold, it was to go do a very distinctly different dream, which was this: we were fascinated by how our ancestors lived. We had explored and lived with the Hadzabe tribe of Africa in Tanzania, and learned how they lived and survived. Spent several months hunting and gathering with them and living the way they lived. And then we did the same in Belize and Guatemala with a Mayan family in a Mayan village, and learned how to survive in the jungle. And then we took all kinds of courses on survival, and we said, let's go do this now in North America, in the north, in the cold.
That's awesome.
And so we did. And that's when we had ended up having this amazing indigenous experience here in Canada, with neighbors that were if walking to them, it took us about 6, 7 hours to get to them, but they were a close neighbor in terms of British Columbia.
Did you did you want to do this before all the entrepreneurial stuff as well, or why? Do you think there was something specific about the timing for why you and your husband decided you wanted to do this?
Yes, there was. So each of us had thought about this as kids. Each of us had different ideas about what that looked like, and we didn't know each other. We met in our 30s, and the first night we met, which was in a Cowboys bar during Calgary Stampede, and we talked about living off the land and all the things that we loved outdoors and what we did outdoors, and that's sort of cemented our relationship in many ways because we had this same goal. And and then as we did these adventures in life, and we were competitive adventure racers as well, and we went on these travels, it just kept saying, we've got to go do this. It's when we're the happiest. We love these challenges together. We've survived so many things in adventure racing and travel. We got to go do this. And at the same time, knowing you need to be relatively healthy and you need to be relatively physically fit. And so we're in our 40s, and you start hearing of people in the 40s that are friends or a little bit older that are getting sick or that are really unfit. And we just went, when are we going to do this dream? You got to go now. And okay, let's go.
So this is like it's almost like it feels like the business side of your life was basically one big adventure, but
Yep.
in quite a different way to what you did in the next part, right? They both seem like really interesting ways to live life, but the common thread seems to be that um, you don't sit around and do anything non-interesting for too long before you find something interesting. So where does that come from? Is it like is there some kind of thread if you just look at the things you've done that keeps guiding you into the next thing and pushing you in all these like interesting directions?
Great observation. And yeah, there absolutely is. And I would say, and I don't know where it came from, whether it's part of my personality um, or from different life experiences growing up, but I have to experience new things on a regular basis. So it's partly why I haven't stayed with any business all that long either. I'm about 7 years, and then I've got to get on to the next new thing. I love something new all the time. I can't run the same path. I got to find a new trail. Um, and so everything in my life has always focused around trying new things. Anything that scares me is like, okay, it's going on the list. Got to go do it. Anything that's uncomfortable or different, I've spent a life every day doing something unusual and different from my life. So for others, it might be that they go to a new park. Um, that's sort of where I started, is I tried something new that was, minor, but trying something new, small scale, you slowly move up the scale of what becomes harder and harder to do, like skydiving and scuba diving and adventure racing and things that I never thought I would do. I got to go live with a tribe in Tanzania with my blonde hair. Like, why? So there's something that then fulfills me. I learned something new. I've grown from it. I've opened myself to some new experiences, and it always leads to something better, even though I don't know what that something better might be when I go to do it. And that theme, I believe, has allowed me to have a life in which I can say I've done a whole lot of different things that other people haven't.
On the point about you started out small, was that a conscious decision, or do you just look back on it and feel like, oh, it just kind of, yeah?
It wasn't a conscious. I was not aware of it until actually my husband came into my life. So I was doing it, and not until he and I started doing things together did we clue in that we each were going, well, can't do that trail again. Where are we going to go today? Let's go climb Mountain X just to see what's on the other side. So together we started to clue in, what actually is making our relationship strong and exciting is we're pushing our limits that each of us have. And then we clued in that we were actually doing it, and that's when we then started to step it up. All right, let's step these up. Let's keep going bigger and bigger. And then of course the biggest one. So we were doing this throughout my entrepreneurial journey. And even entrepreneurism is one of those, let's sure try that. But the biggest one was, let's give it all up, walk away from everything we've known, every comfort, and go live as hunter-gatherers. And that was our biggest adventure.
You start out trying to find a new trail to walk on the weekends, and
Yep.
you end up in Tanzania and Belize living off the land.
Yes.
Okay, so what's that? What was that adventure like? So you had both been thinking about this for a while, but then you commit. So how did you? You mentioned a few different places, and you ended up in Canada, back in Canada with an indigenous group. But what was the? Did you have a goal stepping into that part of life? What did you learn? Is there anything that surprised? Like, I'm just so curious to understand everything about that experience, but I don't even know what questions to ask about it.
Yes, no, we did not really have a goal other than we have to go do this or we will have a regret in life. So that was really it. Like, we got to go do this. It is going to be a regret if we don't go do it. Let's just go do it. And we had thought we would live very minimally. We also left too, sort of pissed off at the world, sort of how young people find themselves now. Of we were angry at society, at what they'd done to the planet, at the way money, growth seemed to be the only thing people knew. We had, we, even though we lived that dream and did it, we also though were sort of burned out. We were burned out of that journey of building and building and building, and we were sort of not happy with the way world was. So we had thought, let's just go do it, and it'll be our life. We'll live simple, we'll live comfortably, supposedly, and that will become our new life. And we had no plan beyond that. Let's just go do it. And the journey itself, we accidentally lived the evolution of civilization. So we did 2 years as hunter-gatherers. Then we added in farming, and we were trading with the neighbors and getting seeds and sharing food. And then the farming era, we went, oh goodness, thank God people came up with the industrial age, because this farming thing, it's hard work and you're starving. And then we started cluing in, jeepers, I wish I had a pesticide. Hate to say that. But all of a sudden it was like, we used to scream and yell and picket and scream at people about pesticides. And then I went, right now, when I'm starving and I don't, my plants are being eaten by pests, I'm wanting an innovation to help me not starve. And so then we got solar and wind. Then we had energy. Then we got the internet. Now we're in the information age. We added in a greenhouse. And then we technologically changed that. And we ended up, my husband is an instrumentation technician, and so he automated everything. So we ended up in the 7th year living more futuristic than everyone does today. And so on this 7-year journey, we went from hunter-gatherer through all these eras to a fully self-sufficient circular system with zero costs. Everything was a sunk cost now. We paid for everything. And we had a full circular food system that took care of itself because it was automated. Internet of Things was doing its thing. And we now were able to just go and explore every mountain and bike and tour, and our food was taking care of itself. And that realization was partly what brought us back, was innovation and everything we've done as a society and every innovation people have created. It was for a really good reason at the time. And they didn't fully understand the unforeseen consequences of what they had done at the time. But they did solve something very important for humanity. Pesticides solved the potato famine. Billions of people died. And so the unforeseen consequences is what we need to innovate on now. We need to now focus on the side effects of the bad things we've all innovated on that helped something before. And now we need to disrupt that industry with something completely newly disruptive and innovative. But we couldn't have got here without that. We couldn't have got here without oil and gas. We couldn't have got here without a pipeline. We couldn't have got here without a pesticide. And so they were important steps in our learning and our growth. And that's where we clued in. This is all about learning. Everything is about learning. And until you have lived in someone else's shoes, which is now innovation, design thinking, until you've lived truly in someone else's shoes, which we've done through the eras, you do not understand the hardship of why that innovation occurred. And so we now, our new experiences are living in other people's shoes now. So since we've come back to society, we keep saying there's screaming and yelling at each other and picketing outside of an organization you hate isn't solving anything. It's if we go and innovate together using their resources and profits on something new to disrupt themselves that they can go on to make money with. Together, the environmentalists and the oil and gas people can actually come up with something great.
Before you went on the journey, do you feel like a little bit more opinionated against some of the things you were seeing, whether it's on climate change, etc.? But
Yeah.
that might be just what I'm hearing. But it sounds like, and then as you live through it, you start to realize the purpose of each of the stages. So
Yes.
before and after, how was your thoughts? Like, what was your thought towards things like climate change or oil companies or pesticides or the meat industry? Like, yeah.
You nailed it. We went away angry. We went away like a lot of young people are probably feeling today, right? You guys got exposed to it pretty early on. We journeyed to it. And so we went away angry, environmentalists through and through, and love everything they're doing. Totally love it. It's right. Climate change, it's all correct. All of it's correct. As long as we're using science, I shouldn't say all is correct. Please, people, educate and use science. And then and that's part of the journey back home too, is to learn and learn and learn. And that's new stuff. Read something you wouldn't normally read. Get off of social media, because what social media is doing is it's feeding you your own viewpoint back. So the only reading you're getting is about what you already believe. You're in the algorithm that feeds you what you think, versus start hearing other viewpoints, start doing something new to learn something different from what you already think. You still may end up at the same spot. I still agree we got to do stuff about climate change, but I now think what we need to do is not the same as what is currently being done, nor was being done when we left. And the fighting and arguing and hatred and blame serves zero purpose. And if we all run away to the land, it's going to serve zero purpose. We will destroy the land quicker if we all run away to be back to the landers than if we figure out how to innovate from where we are today. In the cities, fix our cities, make them nature places, make them food production, make our cities these beautiful places that we feel connected to the land.
In one, it's almost like when you look at it now, does it feel like it's kind of like history's like making a bunch of almost like guesses, and then you kind of are going, and then and it's course correcting along the way. And social media itself seems like one of these things where I know some people have a really cynical view of Facebook, and I did too at some point, but I highly doubt that when he was starting Facebook, he was thinking he wanted to create a bunch of
Right.
election integrity issues and things. It was about making it easier to connect with people. And before WhatsApp or Facebook
Perfect.
or these things, right? It's the same concept, is it not? Uh,
Exactly the same concept. He was doing it, he was innovating something for a very good reason. And yes, there were unforeseen consequences. So screaming and yelling at him, and picketing him, um, and saying that he's done something terrible, and the algorithms that they've put in place, they're doing them for a reason that actually did make sense at the time. And now we learn. And so if you've learned something, we innovate from here versus blaming. Because Mark Zuckerberg is probably the answer to fixing it if the right people and him are in the room to innovate on what should we do now. Not
yeah.
tear it down, not stop it. It did something great. It connected the world.
Have you seen the documentary The Social Dilemma on Netflix?
I have not seen that one. I'm going to.
Yeah, you should check it out because it's basically all about this. Um, on one hand, I thought it did a really good job of exposing people to the fact that they're being controlled by the algorithms. But it also had you could tell it wasn't necessarily the most balanced perspective. Like the nonprofit that put it out wanted to make a very clear statement, which I think is still important, which is you have to be
Yep.
aware of what these things are doing, even if it's unintentionally.
Yes.
But the other side of that is yeah, I feel like with a lot of things, there's a tendency to want to go back or like revert, but
Yes.
this doesn't. I haven't heard of a single scenario where this has actually worked, where something gets let out into the world, and then you rally really hard against it and you push it back. It seems like more often than not, you redirect it in some way, and people are creative about the way they do that. And that sounds very similar to what you're saying about you go and you disrupt these things and you take advantage of the people there to do it. I'm also reading this good book called Eating Animals, um, and it's about the eating ethics of eating meat. And one of the cool things about this book is the author still comes across pretty strongly as like don't eat meat, and I'm also kind of more moving towards that side myself. But one of the cool things he does is he shows he basically gets like a factory farmer's perspective to like write out why like his response to what he's doing because people are like you're a terrible human being, you're causing so much suffering. But then he basically talks about how this was the result of the fact that his family's been farmers for generations, but it gets more and more competitive. And in order to compete and make a profit, you have to have a bigger and bigger farm. And suddenly they're like running this big factory farm thing. And they're not super happy about it either, but they have to figure out a way to live in the middle of this as well.
Right.
So it's really cool that you spent the time and like a lot of it too to understand all this. So when you were going through the the like Belize and Tanzania, was that mostly in the hunter gatherer phase to understand that? And then, if I'm understanding correctly, a lot of the things about IoT and internet, you brought that to build an Earthship, right? Somewhere in Canada. And can
We
you
brought
explain
that
what an Earthship
afterwards.
is and all that? Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, our journey was to be hunter gatherers. So we learned from these different communities and then went to do it. And then accidentally realized, oh my goodness, that is really hard. I know why our ancestors were dying at the age of 30, because it's really hard. And then farming, oh, really, really hard, almost harder than hunting gathering. And we had to supplement farming with hunting gathering. We wouldn't have survived. And and then moved into the greenhouse concept, and that's the industrial age. And so it's we accidentally ended up with the Internet of Things and automation by researching how do we make this more comfortable for
Yeah.
us. And so it was that journey of discovering and feeling what it felt like and realizing we cannot go back. So your statement about we cannot go back, we cannot. That was the other big message. One, innovation has all been great throughout society. Every innovation we've done to date has got us to today. And then the second learning is, and they all have unforeseen consequences, all of it. And so let's just innovate on those unforeseen consequences and move forward. And then the other is you can't go back. We can't go back. So find a way forward, people, and stop. We also did the same thing. We romanticized the past. People often say, wouldn't it be great if we could live on the farm? Or wouldn't it be great if we lived in little villages? You don't actually understand what that feels like.
Yeah. Another interesting parallel to this is um, there's a lot of these books around. I'm not sure if you've heard of this one, Digital Minimalism by Cal Newport.
Yep.
Yeah. So there's at first I found that book really interesting because it advocates for kind of going back to, in a sense, going back a little bit where you're like not using your phone and things like that. It's practical on some level where, in general, I think more people can use their phone less and still achieve whatever they want to achieve, whether it's through communication or whatnot. But at the same time, you realize like the way the world is going, you're gonna need one.
Yeah.
It's not going away
Yep.
unless you take the most extreme possible position and you go live in Tanzania or wherever in
Yep.
some place that has none of that. Um, the way the world is moving, you would have to trade off on so many things that's just not practical for most people.
Right.
So I'm not sure that. I think that's part of the solution is to be a little bit mindful of it. But
Cool.
you know,
Yes.
long term, I don't. I think it's the same thing. You have to redirect it into something, and I'm not sure what that's going to be. But I'm interested to see what happens.
Yeah, and I agree. So, we went away 2007 to 2014, um, living very remotely, not connected, totally disconnected. That's when smartphones came out. That is when social media took off. That is when so many of the disruptive technologies came out. Is during that time, and by getting the internet, we realized how incredibly important that was on our journey to get to that seventh year of living in a way that actually was what our original goal was, which was to live gently on the land, no, almost minimal carbon footprint, no cost, complete freedom, and fully self-sufficient. So we actually accomplished it with the technology of today, not back as a hunter gatherer. It was technology of today that allowed that. And so each step in technology, including our phones, is moving us towards this place that we all want. We all want more freedom and time. We want to do meaningful things. Every problem that we have today, that people scream and yell at, these are amazing social innovation, social entrepreneurship opportunities. Every one of them will also create a consequence eventually. But we've got so much opportunity right now to make such great changes and strides forward. But you need to use what you have today to ladder to the next thing.
Hmm.
And oil and gas plays a big role in that. And until we come up with something that's, because even solar and wind, I've now experienced solar and wind. That's not the answer. It is part of it, but it isn't going to get us fully away from oil and gas. And so this, again, the oil and gas companies might be the smartest ones to help find the solution, because they also want to. Nobody wants to hurt the planet. Shouldn't say that. There's a small percentage that don't care about other people or the planet, but it's a very small percentage. Very small. I think everybody, 98% of the world, cares tremendously.
Yeah, I think I would have been really curious if you could have made a Netflix documentary or something out of that your time doing this because it would have been an interesting thing to see, which is people with some pretty strong convictions, like a lot of people starting out probably and thinking about these issues, go away to do this thing, and unintentionally you end up in the same place, but you view it in a different way. So I'm not sure if that'll ever happen, but
I would
I
love
think,
that. Love
yeah,
that.
I no, I really think it's an interesting and important message because, in some sense, also, I think like if you're angry about climate change, for example, today, or you're angry about a particular thing, no one's going to criticize you for that or tell you that you shouldn't feel that way because those are real problems. So it's harder to approach folks that are really angry about these things on an emotional level and say, hey, maybe you should empathize on this level or this level or whatever. That's not an easy message to convey to someone. But you actually went and you kind of stumbled into that yourself, and you came away with this empathy. And um, I guess I'm curious to get into the what you did after coming back from that adventure too, and how that's paying forward. But it feels like empathy is actually required to understand the actual dynamics of how this whole system is working, so you can be educated about the way that you're going to go and try and solve things instead of like one of these like rage against the system mentalities, which in
Yes.
some cases probably still makes sense and is a part of the system as well as
Yep.
doing that and fighting
Yep.
for those things. But I just find it super fascinating that, you know, it would be one thing if you went into the adventure saying, I want to be able to empathize with each of the different, you know, but it just happened. It's like you release your expectations, you did it, and then you find that you end up in this position. That's what's so interesting about it is you weren't looking for the conclusion when you
Yeah.
started.
Correct. And I think empathy isn't the place to start because you're right. People can't go from angry to empathizing the other side of the equation. What happened next was I came back to Kingston, Ontario to care for aging parents. And that's part of what brought us out of the bush was I had aging parents. We need to come back and care for them. And I ended up becoming the director of the Masters of Management program in innovation and entrepreneurship at Queen's University. And I built that program and scaled it up just like another startup. But through that process was really able to start understanding the process of innovation because I didn't know that. I just knew coming out of the bush, innovation's been great. And so this process of innovation, so the design thinking process or design sprints or agile and lean, and what it allowed me to do is go, what we need people to come together around is that we care about solving something. So let's come together around if you, organization X that is hated, cares about solving the consequences you have created, and you, environmentalist, care about solving this. It's the caring that we all care that brings us together. We want to solve this and we are going to solve it. A conviction and a hope that we can solve this. If we can get to a place that we can solve this, then you can start talking and then you layer in the process of innovation with some good facilitators. Because the starting point of a design process now puts everybody in empathy. Everyone needs to experience what the other one feels. And if we want to solve homelessness, the homeless people should be in that process. Do not exclude anyone because they're marginalized or the diversity and including the people who actually are living the problem needs to be a big part of this, the trying to solve. And so I now am a firm believer that we already even know the process of innovation differently than we did before. And that's got to bring people together to say, I care and we are going to solve it. Humans together can solve these things.
And this was what a lot of what you were working on at Queens in that program.
You got it.
Was that part of the? So how did that? Um, could you talk about the program a bit? And obviously, it's a graduate program, like of a business variety. And so when they come in there, how do some of the things that you're talking about apply in the way that you teach those folks? Yeah, just curious about the format.
Yeah, and so the program really teaches people on how to understand problems really well, and this deep dive into the problem itself. And yeah, you get angry and righteous, and you should, because that means you're feeling this problem deeply. So The process that we put people through is, first we start with problem, and we stay in the problem and the human being that has the problem or is living the pain is where you have to stay for a very long time. It's the most important part of solving anything, is truly understanding the problem and the root causes of it and the whole system around it, and understanding the human being at the center of it who is experiencing significant pain because of this problem. And then that's the big, spend a huge amount of time there. And that's when you now are able to start brainstorming possible solutions. And then we take you through the whole process of lean and agile and business startup, but business startup from a social innovation perspective. Yes, we do non-social enterprises as well through the process, but social innovation became my passion.
Hmm.
And social innovating on people and planet were where I really started to shine and grow and say, we can solve all these things. And bringing the people along, giving access to a university degree, a master's degree, to someone who doesn't have an undergrad, who has lived a very, very, very difficult life, and bringing them in and putting a team around solving the social issues that individual faces, then you get change, because those people who don't have that social issue are learning from the individual who's lived it.
It's kind of like one connection I just made as you were talking about this is, let's say you had sold the Fort Senior Care Company and went straight to Queens to do this. It feels like there would have been a different flavor to it completely, because a lot of that empathy and that whole thing was developed during the Earthship saga, right?
Yeah.
Okay, very cool.
Yeah.
And so,
And this is why people need to go and do crazy things or wild things or whatever you want to call them, different from what they normally do, because you learn something you never expected to learn.
yeah, it that's part of the one of the literally the name of this podcast is wandering. And so part of the reason I chose that is because, like, if you're, for example, in the tech world, you have like a very defined there's a very defined map of how you work your way up it, whatever that means. Or if you're in like banking, there's a certain map. And I think that's like it almost becomes a path of least resistance in whatever
Yep.
bubble you're in,
Comfort.
and you keep doing these things. So it takes an interesting kind of person to go out and do these things. And I think part of the anxiety people have about this is, like, will it pay off in some way? But looking at your story, there's all these very interesting connections that you would never expect to go through. But it also seems like these are some of the most important realizations and the ones that are the hardest to kind of come by. And you can't just say, I'm going to discover this and then go and you land there. It's like, it's almost like a little, there's a little bit of randomness to it as well. But just looking at through your story, even through this conversation, it seems like you really embrace randomness and serendipity and all these other things, like through and through. So
Yes.
it's
Yep.
pretty inspiring.
Yeah. And I think it's like I said, if you just start doing something different from what you've done today, start small, move to bigger things. If you always read suspense, go read a romance, even though it kills you. It changes your brain. And so it's these little changes, and slowly you grow to bigger ones. And eventually you're just expanding your brain in areas you never even expected. And even the person on that comfort path in the banking system, for example, it's the exact same thing over and over again. Everything we do as humans is actually the same thing over and over again. It's partly why I can't stay at one company, one startup, because eventually my job as a teacher, and I'm no longer there now, did that for 5 years, but I'm repeating the same thing over and over again. As soon as I recognize, I'm not growing or learning anything new here, I either want to solve a problem within that system. So if you don't want to leave banking, you don't want to be an entrepreneur. A lot of people don't. But within your comfort pattern, go, you know what? This is actually a problem. Why don't I see if we can tackle something related to this little piece of this entire chain? And all of a sudden you're doing something new and different. and your brain expands. You learn something new, might not be what you thought, might want to leave that alone, and then you move on to something else to go look at.
And we could probably do an entire like conversation as well on like these kinds of micro changes, because it feels like if you are able to make, because a lot of these big life changing sudden jumps, um, I think for a lot of people there's certain times where that happens, but those don't happen super frequently. But it does sound like if you are able to kind of make some of these really small changes like you're thinking about, it pushes your interest in enough interesting directions that when it's time to make those kinds of shifts, they will happen without you trying to like force something into being. Is that right? Or okay,
You nailed it. You got it.
okay. I
Yeah.
dig that. Yeah, and I think especially right now, if we think about the circumstances, like it's COVID, people have been working at home or whatever for a year, and life can be boring or stale, and it gets pretty monotonous at times. But using this as a way of life, not as a almost like a one-off thing that you're going to do here or there, but as something you just try to live throughout your life, I think that's really exciting. Um,
Yeah. And COVID,
and
you just actually landed on something very important. My husband and I have loved the COVID lifestyle. We've been in lockdown here in Ontario for just about the whole time. But what it did was we had to get more creative. And so every single week, we pick a new adventure. It might mean we're driving 100K away to go do some new road on our mountain bike, dirt road in the middle of nowhere. We don't know what's in there. We're just going to go and do it. And so we've made a point of every week doing something cool and different and interesting. Try new sports because we got to stay alone anyway. So try a new sport this week. Try a new location this week. And then what this month are we going to do different that we wouldn't have done before? Let's watch a documentary on a religion that we aren't familiar with. And so we've ended up doing so much more of these smaller things during the past year. We have learned a tremendous amount, and we're not bored. Can't say I'm bored at all. And I've got a new startup going. So,
most people would expect that someone who's used to doing so many things, whether it's building an Earthship or building a company, that uh, being in your house and being quarantined would be like the death of you or something. So
yep.
that's also, I get the feeling that you and your husband are both super optimistic people and
Yes.
are just, you know, I've noticed that throughout this conversation, it's just like there are ups and downs, but um, it seems like you guys really look to always, without just accepting that, oh, COVID sucks or quarantine sucks or these kinds of
Yeah.
things. And I think sometimes it's hard to break out of for some folks because, again, these are the kinds of things where if you told anyone, no one would tell you to think differently because that's just how it is or
Yep.
whatnot. So, so it's pretty refreshing to hear some of these things. And so you mentioned you have a new startup. So what's that about? And
Yeah.
that's
So
the next chapter, right?
it is. I've now um, combined. So my next dream or next goal, I've combined some of the things that I've learned over the years. And one of the part of the story that we didn't talk about is I did grow up with a mentally ill mother who was in and out of mental institutions all my childhood and growing up. And then my first husband was mentally ill and did commit suicide. And so I've got this a huge path of this mental illness stream throughout my life. And so I feel like I've come full circle back, caring for my mom again now, but full circle back. And my startup is called Wayfound Mental Health Group. And it is the most innovative. They have come out with an assessment tool, a methodology, and we're experimenting in psychedelics. 3 of the newest that are proven with research-backed evidence, innovative, getting better outcomes, and we're targeting and focused on PTSD for our public safety personnel, military, police, paramedics, emerge docs and nurses, and firefighters. And so we are a social enterprise impacting people who are having a very difficult time today. And I've come right back now. I am a social innovator impacting something that has had a huge impact in my life, that I have overcome and stayed very optimistic throughout my whole life, because I know how important it is to take care of my mental health. And so my journey was always about being mentally well. I must always be mentally well. And what do I need to do to stay mentally well? Is do something different and new and exciting.
It's amazing. Do you uh for the next start, so you've already started. Where are you at with it
Mm-hmm.
right now? Is it just getting off the ground? What's happening in that side of things?
Yeah, so it actually is it's a 20-year-old company that we are a re-startup. So they went bankrupt because they were innovating and doing too much research. So they were spectacularly trying to disrupt an industry that hasn't been changed in 200 years. And of course, that takes a lot of money. And they're all amazing psychotherapists and psychiatrists, and they didn't have any business. And so I find they're trying to just sell assets and go back to just doing what they do, and getting, mediocre outcomes, back doing talk therapy and giving some drugs out. And so they were just selling stuff off. And I found them because I'm searching for a new business opportunity, and went, oh, you guys are so amazing. Such amazing people. I want to join you. And here's some money. And then we were able to raise some more money. And so we're a re-startup. And we've just really started on the new mission forward of getting these innovations out there, because we've just recently raised that money. And we are on a path of continually innovating this industry. And so we're in that risk stage. I can, lose it all again, which is fine, because I am on a mission and we're going to do what we can do. And there we are. We're going to
So
grow this thing globally.
this is going to be chapter. Actually, I'm not even sure what chapter it would be, but a pretty exciting one nonetheless. So, um, we'll also include links and things like that if you want to point people in the direction as well. Um, but Cherry, so I think as we're coming up on time, um, is there anything else on your mind you wanted to share about any of the things we talked about today, or anything you want the audience to know, or just could be any random thought?
I think the one thing I want to conclude with comes back again to mental well-being, because that's all everyone is looking for, right? Is health, wellness. And I would say the number one thing that I have been able to do is, no matter what is happening in my life or around me, bankruptcy, suicide, failures, struggles along the way financially, no matter when those happen, I've been able and always capable to say that I am still okay. I am okay. I am okay. So if I'm feeling low, I just need to try to get to okay. There isn't this need to get back up here to this optimistic place. And how do I get to okay? Is go just walk. Be gentle to myself and walk somewhere new. Be gentle and take a new drive to work. Just rewiring my brain with something new to get from here to just okay. And okay is a great place to be. It's an awesome place to be. It's all right. Because life isn't about being here. It's going through it and still always saying, I'm okay. I'm okay. Everything's fine. It is. Like, what's wrong? You have to go get a job because you're bankrupt? Oh, well. Really? Is that bad? No, it's not.
It's amazing that you came to this conclusion after going through, like, you'd expect there's like some kind of like secret mental hack or something, or some complicated thing, but just walk, try new things. And it would be one thing if someone was giving that advice as someone to just someone, but if you've gone through the things that you've gone through and you arrive at those conclusions, That's a little bit more interesting. So, is that something you just realized over time that, like, when you're really low, especially after some of these really difficult ones, how did you still come to the conclusion that you just need to get to okay? Like,
Because it was the only thing that could save me, right? When you're really low, the only thing I could think of is I just got to get to okay. So how do we get to okay? Well, I normally like running. Okay, so let's walk. I love the outdoors. Let's go to a park. I can do that today.
okay,
And so I've got to just get back to being okay. And what do I need to do? And it's different for everybody, that gets me back to okay. And I'm not shooting for the stars because that's too big. That's a massive task. I'm just shooting just to be okay.
I like that. I like that a lot. Um, okay, Sherry. So, this has been super fun for me, and I'm sure it will be as well for folks that watch. Um, I would be curious also, maybe in the future we even do like a follow up or something, because I feel there's too much I think to go through even in an hour and a half. Um, but I super appreciate your time and everything you've shared. And yeah, thank you for taking the time to do this.
Thank you so much for having me. And if it helps somebody else, that's sort of where I'm at in life. Is if my lived experience can do something and help somebody else, great. And if it doesn't, that's all right too.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Uh,